From Studio 19, I'm Jeff Allen Wolf, and this is definitely a world gone mad. It's very hard doing a podcast during the summer. Let me explain what I mean. Most people are busy with vacation, kids are out of school, backyard barbecues, fixing up the house, etc. So during the summer, podcasts like mine, the listening numbers drop dramatically. Feels like a ghost town. And for a lot of you who don't understand, the podcast host can see if anybody listens to their podcast through the stats and the numbers. And no, we don't see your name, but we do see if someone tuned in and gave a listen to a particular episode. So even though right now this is the lowest time during the year when people listen to this podcast, I'm still going to plow through. Hopefully some of you are checking in with me, listening to this episode, and will send me an email to let me know you're alive. That email to remind you is wolfpacktalks@gmail.com if you'd like to say hello. And to those of you that don't know, I'm also doing a Substack. It's free. It's different from the podcast. If you're not familiar with Substack, these are written articles from me. Go to Substack, type in Jeff Allen Wolf. Hopefully you know how to spell my name by now. You'll see Jeff Allen Wolf, The Wolf's Den. Yes, there are other Substacks called The Wolf's Den, but there's only one. That's mine. All right, let's move on. The Supreme Court is about to decide whether the Trump administration can move forward with new mail voting restrictions before the midterm elections. Lower courts hit the brakes on that, warning that changing election rules this close to voting could create confusion and potentially keep eligible voters from casting ballots. Now, the Supreme Court justices are being asked to decide whether those changes should move ahead anyway. Incredibly laughable, this whole situation. You know what fascinates me? Every election, politicians suddenly discover they're deeply concerned about election integrity. Funny how that concern always seems to arrive right around election season. Nobody spends 3 years saying, boy, we better fix this by 2029. No, it's always, we've got an election coming, let's remodel the stadium during the fourth quarter. Imagine the NFL announcing on Friday that the end zones are moving 5 yards farther back before the Sunday's games. The referees would need new instructions. The coaches would need new game plans. The fans would be asking, wait, are we even playing the same sport? Yet somehow we're expected to believe changing election rules close to Election Day is just another routine administrative update. Now, the Supreme Court has often talked about avoiding exactly that kind of chaos. The basic idea is pretty simple. Whether you love the rules or hate the rules, voters deserve to know what the rules are before they cast their ballots. That's not a Democratic principle. That's not a Republican principle. That's a democracy principle. Now, maybe that's the biggest lesson here. Stable election rules aren't designed to help one party win. They're designed so Americans can trust that the rules themselves don't have a rooting interest. Candidates are supposed to compete. Campaigns are supposed to compete. Political parties are supposed to compete. The rules aren't supposed to. And that's where I think Washington keeps getting it backwards. Politicians act as though changing the rules is the way you build confidence. Sometimes it's exactly the opposite. Confidence comes from knowing the rules aren't moving every time the political winds shift. Democracy isn't supposed to feel like your phone downloading another software update. Please accept the new terms and conditions before voting. That's why this case before the Supreme Court matters. It's bigger than Donald Trump. It's bigger than mail ballots. It's about whether election rules become permanent guardrails or temporary campaign strategies. Because once people start believing the rules have a favorite, they stop arguing over candidates. They start questioning the referee. At the moment citizens lose confidence that the referee is calling the same game for everyone, it almost doesn't matter who wins. Half the country walks away convinced the outcome was decided before the opening kickoff. Now, the rules are supposed to be the one thing in politics that never has a rooting interest. If we lose confidence in that, we're no longer arguing about Republicans or Democrats. We're arguing about whether the game itself can still be trusted. The next thing I definitely want to bitch about, key GOP holdouts say they'll back Todd Blanche for Attorney General after he rescinded Trump's anti-weaponization fund. So let me see if I've got this straight. Just a few days ago, 2 Republican senators were saying, hold on, we can't support Todd Blanche. They had concerns. They wanted answers. They wanted changes. They were standing on principle. Then, almost overnight, Todd Blanche announces he's rescinding the Trump administration's so-called anti-weaponization fund. Now as part of an agreement involving IRS audits of President Trump and his family. And suddenly those same senators say, you know what? We're good. Seriously? That's all it took? What's amazing isn't even whether those changes are legally binding. Some legal experts are already questioning whether they are. The agreement that created the fund still exists. It's not even clear one person can simply wave a magic wand and make parts of it disappear. But apparently, that didn't matter. The senators were satisfied enough to move forward with confirming Todd Blanche as Attorney General. Now here's where it gets really strange. Donald Trump had been defending that fund publicly. He said people who believed they had been targeted by the government deserved compensation. Trump even suggested he might pull Todd Blanche's nomination if Republicans didn't get on board. So now we're supposed to believe Trump's own former personal attorney just decided to reverse course on something the president was defending? Come on. Does anybody honestly think Todd Blanche woke up one morning and thought, you know what? I'm just going to ignore what Donald Trump wants today. This is the same Todd Blanche who has been one of Trump's most loyal legal defenders for years. If you believe this happened independently, I've got some beachfront property in Arizona I'd like to show you. The timing is just too perfect. Senators object. Blanche makes changes. Senators immediately fall in line. Nomination back on track. But maybe the bigger story isn't Todd Blanche. Maybe it's what this says about the word we hear over and over again in Washington. Principles. Politicians love talking about principles. They tell us they're drawing a line in the sand. They tell us there are certain things they simply cannot support. They hold press conferences. They issue dramatic statements. Cable news spends hours debating who's standing firm and who's refusing to back down. Then a meeting happens. A document changes. A few conversations take place behind closed doors. Suddenly those lines in the sand aren't quite where they were yesterday. There's a difference between a principle and a negotiating position. A principle is something you hold on to even when it's inconvenient. A negotiating position is something you're willing to trade away once you get enough to declare victory. Those aren't the same thing. Now, I'm not saying a compromise is bad. Democracy requires compromise. Our system was designed around compromise. But don't confuse compromise with conviction. If something is truly a matter of principle, it shouldn't become negotiable because somebody revised a document or offered language that may not even be legally enforceable. And maybe that's why so many Americans have become cynical. It's not because politicians compromise. It's because we're constantly told these are absolute matters of conscience, only to watch those matters of conscience become surprisingly flexible almost overnight. Washington loves to call this negotiation. The rest of us might call it something else. Maybe that's the lesson. In today's Washington, principles don't necessarily disappear. Sometimes they just become negotiable. And when they become negotiable that quickly, it's fair to ask whether they were really principles in the first place, or whether they were simply leverage until everyone found a way to declare victory. Because here's the difference, Wolfpack. A principle is supposed to determine your decision. A negotiation is supposed to change it. If the thing you called a principle changes almost overnight, then maybe it was never a principle at all. Maybe it was simply the opening offer. And if that's become normal in Washington, maybe that's exactly why so many Americans no longer know when politicians are speaking from conviction and when they're simply negotiating in public. And finally, more evidence of a world gone mad? Robert F. Kennedy Jr. went on CNN this weekend, got into a heated back and forth with Dana Bash. They discussed vaccines, Dr. Anthony Fauci, COVID, measles, pretty much every public landmine you could step on in a 20-minute interview. If you watched it, you probably weren't surprised. RFK Jr. has been making many of these arguments for years. But here's what struck me. The thing that amazes me isn't that RFK Jr. still believes these things. The amazing part is that those same opinions sound completely different when they're coming from the Secretary of Health and Human Services instead of a guy sitting behind a podcast microphone. Those are two completely different jobs. When you're a podcaster, your job is to start conversations, challenge assumptions, ask uncomfortable questions, throw out ideas out there, let people argue about them. I've spent decades behind microphones. I understand that world. But when you're the nation's top public health official, the job description changes. At some point, opinions stop being entertainment and start becoming public policy. Every word carries a different weight because people aren't just listening anymore. They're deciding whether to vaccinate their kids, whether to trust their doctor, whether to believe the CDC, or whether to believe you. And maybe that's the part we don't spend enough time talking about. We get so caught up asking whether RFK Jr. won the argument or whether Dana Bash landed the better punch that we miss the bigger story. The real issue isn't whether RFK Jr. has the right to express his opinions. Of course he does. The real issue is that the office changes the meaning of the exact same words. Authority does that. The sentence doesn't change. The consequences do. The opinion doesn't change. The responsibility does. Holding public office isn't just getting a bigger microphone. It's accepting that your words now carry the weight of the institution you represent. Maybe that's what we've forgotten. In America, we fiercely defend the right to speak. We should. But the moment you take that oath, the audience changes. You're no longer speaking only for yourself. Whether you like it or not, your words begin carrying the credibility of the office itself. Free speech belongs to every American. Institutional authority belongs to very few. Those are not the same things. One gives you the freedom to express your views. The other creates an obligation to recognize that millions of people hear those views as official guidance simply because of the office you hold. That's why this interview with RFK Jr. mattered. Not because it was another political argument on television. Those happen every day. It mattered because it exposed the difference between having an opinion and having institutional authority. Once those two become indistinguishable, the public no longer knows where personal belief ends and official guidance begins. Democracies don't just depend on free speech. They also depend on people understanding the difference between individual opinion and institutional responsibility. When those two begin to blur, trust doesn't disappear overnight. It slowly erodes because people can no longer tell when they're hearing a citizen and when they're hearing the government. That's the burden of high office. The office doesn't just amplify your voice. It amplifies the consequences. For those of you that do listen during the summer to my podcast, please send me an email with your thoughts and comments on this or anything else. wolfpacktalks@gmail.com. And subscribe to the podcast, please. That helps me. And if some of you could leave a review on Apple, that goes a long way. So subscribe and leave a review. Also, please check out my Substack. It's free. Go to Substack if you don't have the app. Search for me, Jeff Allen Wolf, The Wolf's Den. Please join in. I'm Jeff Allen Wolf. This is definitely a world gone mad. I'll be back Wednesday. Until then, I urge you, the Wolfpack, remain skeptical, question everything. Please, don't lose hope. And most of all, stay alert.